Hold on, let me do a dance first. We are almost there.
I'm heading for the coast of Gondwana. We're traveling 370 million years into the past to explore a world unlike anything we know today. What did its earliest forests look like? What creatures lived along its rivers and coastlines? What was the climate like? And most importantly, what caused one of the greatest biological crises in Earth's history, an extinction that devastated marine ecosystems and wiped out many of the species living in Devonian seas? The Devonian is often called the Age of Fishes. Armored placoderms lived beside early sharks, ray-finned fish, and lobe-finned fish, producing the most diverse vertebrate communities Earth had yet seen. The Devonian world may seem far removed from the age of dinosaurs, but many of the foundations of the Cretaceous began here. Around 372 million years ago, a chain of environmental crises began transforming the Devonian world. This was not one sudden extinction like the event that ended the age of the dinosaurs. Instead, major extinction pulses struck over roughly 12 to 13 million years. During this time, enormous volcanic eruptions released gases and mercury, destabilizing the climate and contributing to dramatic shifts in temperature and sea level. At the same time, the world's first great forests were spreading across the continents. Their deep roots broke apart rock and created new soils, allowing nutrients to wash through rivers and into the oceans. These nutrients fueled enormous plankton blooms. When the plankton died and decomposed, microbes consumed the oxygen in the water. Oxygen-starved seas expanded across the planet, devastating reefs and marine ecosystems that had flourished for millions of years. This was not one sudden moment of destruction. The Late Devonian Extinction unfolded in repeated pulses, first through the Kellwasser crises, and millions of years later, through the final Hangenberg event. This is where our story begins. The greatest reefs on Earth stood directly in the path of the crisis. Stromatoporoid sponges, tabulate corals, and rugose corals could not survive the changing temperature and oxygen-starved water. An ecosystem built over millions of years began to collapse. Launching into the reef ecosystem, here we go. About 380 million years ago, warm, shallow seas covered broad continental shelves. Sunlight reached immense marine habitats already crowded with unfamiliar Paleozoic life. Stromatoporoid sponges, tabulate corals, and rugose corals built reef complexes on a scale rarely seen again, sheltering brachiopods, trilobites, crinoids, and fish. Storms and currents repeatedly stirred the shelf, lifting carbonate sediment into the water. These thriving ecosystems were productive, but sensitive to changes in circulation and chemistry. In some regions, the water began turning green. Tiny plankton multiplied near the surface, while dead organic material slowly sank into the darkness below. Life on the seafloor depended on oxygen carried in by moving water. When that circulation weakened, stationary animals such as brachiopods and reef builders could not simply swim away. This was a very different Earth. Euramerica rested near the tropics, Gondwana dominated the southern hemisphere, and shallow seas flooded enormous areas of the continents. Across the tropical shelves, stromatoporoid mounds rose like enormous underwater hills. Channels between them carried schools of early fish, surrounded by dense communities of filter-feeding animals. Crinoids reached into the current, trilobites crossed the seafloor, and shelled brachiopods formed thick carpets across the sediment. Most ocean diversity still belonged to the invertebrates, but the Devonian seas were also ruled by armored fish, known as placoderms, like the Dunkleosteus. Their heads and forward bodies were protected by jointed plates of bone, and their jaws carried sharp cutting plates instead of modern teeth. Large placoderms hunted through the reefs, while smaller jawed fish occupied nearly every available role. This was the celebrated age of fishes, but its apparent stability would not last. Early sharks, ray-finned fish, lobe-finned fish, and aquatic tetrapodomorphs were already beginning to diversify. At the time, many remained minor members of the ecosystem, but some of these overlooked lineages would survive what came next. By the Late Devonian, roughly 385 to 360 million years ago, vast Archaeopteryx forests spread across river valleys and humid uplands. For the first time, extensive canopies of tree-sized plants covered the land. Deep branching roots pushed into young soils and entered natural fractures in the bedrock. They stabilized some slopes, but they also widened cracks, allowing rainwater to reach fresh minerals underground. Plant remains, fungi, mineral grains, and spreading roots began forming deeper, richer soils. For the first time, landscapes were storing and recycling nutrients on an enormous scale. Rainwater moved through rock fractured by roots, slowly breaking down its minerals. Dissolved nutrients were carried away, while muddy runoff increased through the newly transformed landscape. Sediment, decaying plant material, and dissolved nutrients flowed into rivers. Tributaries carried this mixture out of the forested interior, toward the lowlands, and eventually, the sea. At the river mouths, brown freshwater spread across the salty continental seas. Fine sediment slowly settled, while phosphorus and other nutrients entered the sunlit water. Those nutrients began fertilizing microscopic plankton. The change was not immediate, but repeated runoff could steadily increase biological productivity across enormous coastal regions. Plankton multiplied throughout the illuminated surface water. The once clear blue-green sea became cloudy and increasingly green, while less and less sunlight reached the depths below. As the plankton died, their remains began sinking through the water like marine snow. This endless organic rain carried carbon and nutrients downward for decomposers living near the seafloor. Bacteria broke down the falling organic material and, in the process, consumed the oxygen dissolved in the water. Warm surface water became separated from the cooler depths below. This layering, known as stratification, prevented fresh oxygen from reaching deeper water. Slowly, the oxygen pore zone began to expand. Mobile fish crowded into a shrinking layer of oxygenated water near the surface. Some bottom dwellers moved toward shallower regions, but attached reef organisms remained trapped exactly where they were. Then, the seas withdrew. Muddy seafloors emerged into the open air, lagoons began shrinking, and abandoned reef structures were left exposed to erosion. Long periods of volcanic activity may have released carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, and ash. Its exact role remains debated, but volcanism could have intensified the growing stress on the climate and oceans. There was no single killer and no single moment of destruction. Forest expansion, nutrient runoff, warming, unstable sea levels, oxygen loss, and possible volcanism overlapped across millions of years. Near the boundary between the Frasnian and Famennian ages, about 372 million years ago, the first major Kellwasser pulse spread oxygen-poor water across parts of the continental shelf. Dark, stagnant water climbed over the deeper reefs, forcing fish into a thinner layer near the surface. Reef animals slowly lost access to the moving, oxygen-rich currents they needed to survive. Stromatoporoids, corals, brachiopods, and crinoids began disappearing. Once busy reef channels became empty, and living surfaces were slowly buried beneath sediment. Beyond the edge of the reef, animal life became increasingly scarce. Deeper still, almost nothing remained. Only dark organic sediment, settling across a silent, oxygen-starved seafloor. Over thousands of years, the black mud was buried, compressed, and transformed into shale. Today, dark Kellwasser bands remain preserved between lighter layers of Devonian limestone. For a short time, clearer water returned. Opportunistic organisms moved across the damaged surfaces, but the reefs remained fragmented, and another mass of stagnant water was already forming offshore. Roughly 600,000 years after the first pulse, the more severe Upper Kellwasser event struck, and this time, the already weakened ecosystems had even less strength to resist it. In some regions, the oxygen-free water also contained hydrogen sulfide. Purple and green sulfur bacteria gathered along the chemical boundary, while surviving fish retreated toward the surface. Reef growth came to a stop. Sediment and microbial films covered the remaining living surfaces until the enormous Devonian reef empire collapsed into eroded rubble. After the main Kellwasser extinction, the Devonian age began. Open sediment replaced many former reefs, but early sharks, ray-finned fish, and lobe-finned fish continued through the simplified world. With many former competitors gone, the survivors began reorganizing. Small sharks moved through open water, ray-finned fish gathered into schools, and lobe-finned fish searched along the bottom. On land, the forests continued changing rivers and soils. Rain, landslides, and collapsing riverbanks carried more sediment and nutrients towards seas that were still vulnerable to oxygen loss. The Devonian was not a peaceful recovery. Plankton blooms returned. Oxygen levels repeatedly fell, and the water only partially cleared. Each crisis left behind another dark layer and a simpler ecosystem. Near the end of the Devonian, the climate began cooling. Far to the south, across Gondwana, seasonal snow remained on the ground, and small glaciers began to grow. As more water became trapped in ice, global sea level began falling. Tropical continental shelves emerged. Coastlines moved outward, and rivers carved new channels through the exposed seafloor. Across southern Gondwana, glaciers thickened and flowed through rocky valleys. Growing ice sheets pulled still more water from the oceans, intensifying the falling sea level far beyond the frozen region. You can see on my map where the ice shelf meets the land and sea, shrinking it further around 359 million years ago. Near the end of the Devonian, glaciation, rapid sea level change, nutrient runoff, rising productivity, and renewed oxygen loss converged. This was the Hangenberg crisis. Once again, enormous amounts of organic material sank from the productive surface water. Decomposition consumed the remaining oxygen. Black sediment spread across the bottom, and survivors fled toward shallow currents. Placoderms had survived the earlier extinction pulses, but the Hangenberg crisis eliminated their remaining major lineages. After ruling the seas for millions of years, their armored silhouettes disappeared. Early ray-finned fish survived as well. In the simplified world after the extinction, their schools became increasingly common in rivers, lagoons, and coastal seas. Aquatic tetrapods and tetrapodomorphs survived close to shallow freshwater. Their low bodies, paddle-like limbs, and fish-like tails were designed for tangled wetlands, not confident walking on dry land. Tetrapods eventually gave rise to every four-limbed vertebrate lineage on Earth, including modern amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. So you could say they are our ancient ancestors. Realistic representation of what they look like, and they look cute. The Great Devonian Reef Empire never returned. Eroded carbonate mounds, broken structures, and empty channels remained. Silent reminders of an ecosystem lost for millions of years. Microbial mats spread across the reef rubble, forming low, rounded mounds. Life was beginning to rebuild. But these simple structures could not replace the enormous coral and stromatoporoid reefs that came before. Early Carboniferous floodplains expanded beneath warm, humid skies. Spore-producing plants colonized the muddy ground, while tetrapods and arthropods remained closely connected to water and decaying vegetation. Recovery did not rebuild the Devonian world. Instead, sharks, ray-finned fish, surviving lobe-finned fish, and early tetrapods diversified into entirely new ecosystems. Shells, plant impressions, placoderm armor, and black organic mud were buried together. Over immense spans of time, pressure transformed them into a geological record of environmental collapse. An entire transformation of the planet survives today as thin, dark bands in stone. The reefs vanished, vertebrate life changed forever, and the first great forests helped reshape the chemistry of Earth. All right, it is time to go home. The Devonian world may seem far removed from the age of dinosaurs, but many of the foundations of the Cretaceous began here. During this period, forests spread across the continents, soils became deeper, and the first vertebrates began taking their earliest steps onto land. Rivers, coastlines, and terrestrial food webs grew increasingly complex. If you like the content, slap a like. Let me know in the comments what type of video you want next.